So, hi everyone, my name's Raiki Asai and I'm the host of the Gifted Giving podcast, the podcast which focuses on helping you to live a better life and to give a better life. So we live a better life by inviting guest experts onto the show to tell us about their area of expertise and how we can apply that to our lives. And then we give a better life by purchasing what they very kindly donate to the GIFTEDgiving.club website, and we pass on 50% of those donations to a givewell.org charity. So you're looking after yourself and you're also paying that forward and looking after others too. So I'm really excited this week to be speaking to Zoe Foster. Zoe is a big picture visionary, a creative problem solver, and a life energy alchemist. So she can tell us a bit more about what that all means. She's the creator of the Expression Elixir, which is a blend of yoga, cognitive psychology, tantric philosophy, and focuses on allowing you to have life-changing results. So welcome, Zoe, to the show.
Hi, Raika. It's so cool to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. So people listening won't know that we've been in each other's online spheres for a really long time.
Yeah.
But this is actually the first time we get to speak to each other, which is one of the really fun things that I selfishly wanted to achieve from these podcasts as a minimum.
Definitely, yeah.
Talking to inspiring people that I've been meaning to speak to for quite a long time. So it's really nice to sort of talk to you.
And you.
And obviously what we kind of agreed that we would talk about today is the blend of healing, self-expression, creativity. And I know your story is also quite closely linked to how those helped you with chronic illness. So sort of sharing all of that with our audience. So I guess my question to sort of start off with is tell us a bit about you and your journey in those areas. Feel free to correct anything I said in the bio that was wrong. And just tell us a bit about yourself and how that all fits into what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. Well, I love this. We often talk about being on a journey, and when somebody says to you, oh, what was the kind of, that point where you realized blah, and I was thinking about this earlier, and, often I say, well, the beginning of my spiritual journey and my healing journey, I really see as January 2013, when I basically took myself off medication for my asthma and my eczema, otherwise known as topical steroid withdrawal, which was the journey that I kind of went through for the next few years. However, when I was thinking about that, it's like, well, actually, it's kind of arbitrary in a way, because there's all these other little points leading up to that as well, some of them also quite major. So for example, in 2006 I decided to leave my lifelong dream of working in publishing and become self-employed, and that was a huge factor in part of my healing process, and yet I don't really tend to acknowledge that. And again, later on, in fact the year after, we left our comfortable, me and my husband, and we left our comfortable, cozy kind of 3-bedroom cottage. We didn't have kids at the time, and we packed everything up. We sold lots of stuff, and we went off in a van. And we lived in a van, and we traveled around, and we did our kind of self-employed thing, the two of us, for like 3.5 years or something. And that again was absolutely massive, because it was part of nurturing and honoring who we were as people. So I just want to say that, I often leave those bits out, and obviously there's other things as well along the way. So it is a journey, and I think that's really important for people to understand in their own lives, that you don't always get this big bolt out of the blue. It's these little kind of things, these little nudges from day to day or month to month, and it's about following those, really. So for my own part, and like I said, I basically started this kind of healing crisis, and I really was plunged into a really horrific time, physically, mentally, emotionally, and also spiritually. In fact, it really was the instigator, if you like, for finding my own spiritual path, my own spirituality, because I was brought up in an atheistic family. And although I always had a sense that that wasn't who I was, I still kind of, I absorbed those values and kind of lived a bit of a confused life because of it. And definitely, I didn't, even when I started my yoga path as a practitioner, before I even went into teaching and so on, I was really uncomfortable with a lot of the aspects of yoga that, even things like chanting or saying namaste at the end of a class, putting my hands together in prayer position, all of that stuff, and, talking about the heart and the energy centers. I found that all so uncomfortable, and I couldn't relate to it. And a big part of my healing journey was actually beginning to open up that part of myself, that spiritual openness. Mm-hmm. So what else would you like to know?
No, I mean that's great, and I can relate to what you were saying about being brought up in a kind of quite a, as you say, atheistic background, where it's what even though it doesn't always necessarily fit right with you, but you don't know what does fit right with you, so you're left in kind of a confused state, as it were. So how much of not being kind of connected to your I guess what you're saying is your self-expression and your soul and yourself, how much of that do you think was linked to the chronic illness journey that you went through?
Sorry, say that again.
So you were talking about kind of not being being a little bit uncomfortable with yoga and the spiritual journey, even though you were brought up in a background that maybe you didn't necessarily connect with. So I'm wondering how with regards to that, learning to express yourself and kind of connect to yourself and your intuition, how did that affect your journey with kind of chronic illness, and how did that all kind of come together?
Oh wow, that's a really big question. Really, what it came down to for me, and I would say that the pivotal point in my healing process, and I do want to kind of interject to say that, I don't believe that healing, first of all, it's non-linear. It's, it's never kind of like you start here and you end up here and it's all done. It's never like that. And so I'm definitely still on that path. It's kind of up and down, up and down, up and down. But it's always, or if you like, a spiral, the golden spiral, if you like. But the pivotal point for me, which I keep coming back to on that spiral, is that sense of an inner light. And for me, growing up, that inner light, without blame anywhere, it was suppressed. It was very much not encouraged. And that's not to say that, I wasn't encouraged kind of creatively. I was, but it was in a sense of more of it being like about form or about achievement, and about getting somewhere, rather than nurturing who I actually was and who I actually am. Mm-hmm. And so the point of my healing journey, it was about 18 months into my topical steroid withdrawal, and I was just getting worse and worse and worse at this point. And I really was at a low in terms of, all of my kind of reserves. I was really at rock bottom and horrifically depressed because of it. And I really thought, what's the point? And it was at that point that I discovered I had reserves elsewhere. So we talk about our physical being, we talk about our emotional and our mental beings. And for me, it really was tapping it. I was at rock bottom in all of those. So I had to open up to my spiritual being. There was nowhere else for me to go. And so doing that, allowing that energy into my life, and for it to kind of, open up the cave that was my own spirituality, my own inner power, my joy, my bliss, all of those things. That's what turned around everything for me, because really that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Everything else, I feel, when we talk about, and you will know about the 5 koshas, when we talk about that, that's like our holistic well-being. That's it all wrapped up in one beautiful kind of circle. But if you don't have the spiritual, I really believe, if you don't tap into that at all, then you're just missing the point completely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you obviously went through that journey. So if anyone who is listening to this or watching this is thinking, oh my God, that sounds like me, that sounds like where I was,
Yeah.
and maybe they're feeling that they're a bit at rock bottom or whatever else, what did that look like for you in terms of that journey? What steps did you take that they could maybe understand or relate to?
Yeah. First of all, compassion. When I went into my healing crisis, I was very kind of gung-ho, and I was like, I'm gonna throw everything at this. I'm gonna put myself on a really strict raw vegan diet. I'm gonna yeah, I can't even remember now, but I know that I was really strict with myself. And quite often now I berate myself for being too soft, and for being a bit lazy, to be perfectly honest. But I've got to remember that I never, I used to be the opposite. So now I'm much more deliberately kind to myself. I'm much more deliberately compassionate and understanding, because I came from a place where I wasn't any of those things, and it hurt me. It hurt me really badly, not just going into my healing crisis, but actually going through it. So I made it worse for myself. And yet again, it's not the point, is it? Despite whatever we are currently suffering, and we're all suffering from something, because we've all got problems of some kind or another. And it's easy to focus on those and say, well, I can't enjoy my life because of this right now. Then you're never going to enjoy your life. The point is to focus on the joy. To focus on the joy despite everything else, because that's the point. Mm-hmm. And so that, for me, is really kind of what started to get me through that, was focusing on my own joy. And obviously that joy that I can then spread out into the world for my family, for my friends, and for others, when I started to teach as well, that I can spread that, because I have grown it within myself. You can't spread what you don't know or what you haven't experienced. And as a yoga teacher, for me, that's one of the most important things, is that people need to know how to tap into joy in their own lives, because we're all so lacking in it. We don't give ourselves the permission to go there, or if we do, it's very brief, and we usually kind of beat ourselves up about it and say, oh, well, I'm going to pay for this now, or something's going to go wrong now, or, all of those kind of ridiculous beliefs that we have. So Yeah, so compassion, kindness to yourself, and learning to tap into that light and that joy. Yeah.
Great. So is that something that you do? I mean, obviously, I know you teach yoga classes, but I guess you also have clients that you work with, as you say, which are holistic in terms of a yoga practice and kind of supporting people through that self-healing journey. So how do you guide them? Let's say there's someone who goes, okay, I need to be more joyful. But as I guess both of us is probably known as people who've maybe gone from being very self-critical, overly analytical, to then sort of saying, okay, well, I need to connect to joy. How do you guide people in that direction?
Sure, it really depends where they're at right now, obviously. Um, but one of the things is, I would say, well, what are your restrictions right now? What do you perceive to be your restrictions right now? And start to work from there, because so many of us have these false barriers, oh, I can't be myself, I can't have that joy because XYZ. So you need to have that, again, compassionate, but you need to have that awareness of what is actually stopping you in the first place. And some of that will be conscious or semi-conscious. Some of it will be quite unconscious as well. So it's kind of, it's starting to look at that, and also starting to look at it without fear, because we all have a shadow self, or shadow selves, multiple. And there's so much power in being able to look at your shadow selves without fear, and just with honesty, and that pure consciousness, because you can't change what you can't see, or what you refuse to see. So just by looking at something like, for example, oh gosh, I know that I comfort eat, instead of thinking, well, that's an unconscious act that you go through and you try and blank it out whenever it happens, or maybe you have a semi-conscious awareness of it, so that you kind of think, well, I'm just going to stuff my face with chocolate and it doesn't matter because I'm unworthy, blah 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 blah, all those stories that we hold. Really, it's not helping, because we're glossing over the fact. If we can look at it with honesty and say, I know I have this issue, and it's something that I can work on, it's something that I can open up into, I can find spaciousness around in order to heal it for myself. And that's not to say you're going to necessarily eradicate that, but you can definitely begin to smooth the edges. And when and next time it comes up for you, you can say, oh, okay, this is happening, but it's okay. I'm in control. It's more about being in control of your own destiny and of your own life, rather than just being kind of blown along with the wind wherever, whenever, and feeling out of control, because so many of us do. There's so many different aspects of our lives, and if you're in control of yourself, if you feel empowered within yourself, then you can't really go wrong, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really lovely way of thinking about that, because as you say, a lot of us have elements of ourselves that we struggle with, kind of shadows within ourselves that we find difficult, and the natural reaction is to try and force and push and shove and
Yeah.
and the lovely thing you said about creating spaciousness, and almost it's an intentionality where you're saying, okay, I accept that this is a part of who I am right now and what I'm doing right now, but to not sort of shun it. But is that kind of what you're saying, that you're aware of it in your experience, and then you take it into your control rather than letting it drive everything that you do?
Absolutely. Bring it into your awareness, almost like you're kind of befriending it. You're befriending your shadow self. And I think it's so important as well, because how we judge ourselves is how we judge others around us. If you have a judgment about being lazy, or about overeating, or about whatever, you are either consciously or unconsciously spreading that out around you, to the people around you. So the automatic thoughts that you have about people on the street, oh gosh, they're lazy, they're fat, they're whatever it is, you start tapping into those thoughts, because that's how you think about yourself. And it's a kind of a circular thing, obviously, but if you start working on it for yourself, bringing compassion and kindness and understanding into that for yourself, so that you can heal it for yourself, then you're going to automatically see the change in your thoughts about other people around you, and you're going to be more empathic, more sympathetic with the people around you as well. Mm-hmm. Because we all have this shit.
Yeah.
It's so true. I think it's very, very easy to get into a victim mindset, especially if you are someone with a chronic condition or illness. And I go there like still, and I get into this victim mindset, and I think, well, nobody else has this problem. Other people have got support networks that I don't have, or these people don't need to take so much care over themselves or whatever. And I knew that everybody is dealing with something, so there's really, when we kind of get into that mindset of, actually, I have this stuff I need to work through, and everybody else around me has this stuff that they need to work through too. So we can actually support each other. We can choose to spread energy of support and love, or we can choose to spread the opposite. It's as simple as that, I think.
And do you work with a lot of people who have chronic conditions similar to what you had, or do you work with a range of different people?
That's hard to answer, because, so yes, I would say that because of my story, I do attract people typically with quite a serious chronic condition. It's on a scale, isn't it? I mean, what do you call serious? But also, I truly believe that everybody has a chronic condition of some kind. And I know that many people would say, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with me. But it's the little things quite often that we don't actually even realise. And sometimes those end up being quite big things. So, for example, for me, I used to get headaches all the time. It was just something from a child. I got headaches constantly. And as I moved into my kind of late 20s, they became migraines, and they started getting worse and worse. And I never get headaches now. Along with a whole host of other things that I've healed, and I never get headaches. It's incredible. But I never really would have considered having constant headaches as being a chronic condition, and yet it was. Do you know what I mean? And there are people who suffer from, indigestion all the time, or gosh, I can't even think. But yeah, there's all these little things that we kind of carry around. Maybe it's just that kind of afternoon fatigue that you always feel, or you get really irritable quite often, and these are all things that are chronic if we don't end up looking at them and beginning to try and heal them. So, to answer your question, yes.
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful answer, and I think you're right. We all have our own things, whether it's our own traumas or our own physical symptoms that we don't realize, we kind of undermine and say, oh yes, okay, I get a headache every Wednesday at 9 o'clock in the morning, but whatever, that's fine, that's normal. So
Yes.
I think it's really, it's very, as you say, compassionate to actually allow everyone to almost go under the same wording and say everyone is experiencing something chronic in some way, and then one, it doesn't stigmatize it, and two, it's just really kind of a part of the human condition that we then spend
Exactly.
the rest of our time unpicking gently and kindly. And yeah,
Exactly, because I think the other thing with chronic illness, and I this is a very sensitive subject, obviously, but when you begin to identify as somebody with a chronic illness or condition, then that's what you focus on.
mm-hmm.
And this is something that I still struggle with, because although I've healed so much along the way, I still struggle with a lot of issues, mainly physically. And so it's easy for me to say, well, I'm struggling with this because I am blah.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that. I really get that. If somebody says, I am, somebody who struggles with endometriosis, or I am somebody with cancer, or I am somebody, with asthma, eczema, whatever, ME, I get that. I really do. And yet, when you identify with that, you're saying, I am that,
Mm-hmm.
then you're making that your life. And what I keep coming back to in my own journey is that I am not that.
Mm-hmm.
That is just something that I'm moving through on my path to joy, to peace, to holistic well-being, to whatever I want, essentially. And yes, it's really hard a lot of the time to kind of say, I can be whatever I want to be. I don't have to be this thing. There's these list of symptoms. At the same time, I truly believe that in order to heal, or in order to move through into a better stage for ourselves, we have to let go of the labels that say, I am this chronic condition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually just reflecting, and obviously, although I've only kind of watched you online until this moment where we're speaking now, and it's been actually for quite a long time, if I think about it, it's been years.
Yeah.
But I can see your journey in that as well, where it felt like when I first knew you, you identified much more with the conditions and the things that were happening to you, and you sort of evolved into this being that is yes, okay, you have your ups and your downs, but
Yeah.
you're much more able to embrace joy, and somehow that revitalizes you and brings you into a better place as well. So you say you're still sort of working on it as you do, and dealing with things as they come. So through all this evolution, what's next for you on your self-healing, whether that's related to chronic illness or just broadly speaking?
Yeah. So what we haven't really talked about, I guess, is this idea of expression.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that has been the longest thing coming, because although it's always been there, I've always kind of known that expression and self-expression is key to healing ourselves. It's been the hardest thing for me to unearth for myself, because I've such an introverted child, and so shy, and so lacking in self-worth, and full of self-doubt, especially with regards to my kind of talents or whatever. And from the earliest age, I wanted to be a writer. And I dabbled with the idea of being an artist as well, and all of those kind of things. And I went into publishing even with the idea of still being a writer. And yet it just got so squashed along the way. The idea of having to put my work out into the world to be judged, and not only that, but to become somebody known in the world, as an introvert. It's like horrific.
Like the worst thing ever.
Exactly. So I've done so much healing on all of those things. I'm definitely not there yet. But at this point in time, I know that, and I have been going through a growth spurt the last few months. Kind of how a growth spurt looks to me is basically I go quiet for quite a long time and I come back into myself, and there's lots of kind of layers of healing and shedding and all of that kind of stuff, and then I start to emerge again, and it's about embracing a new level of expression for myself and allowing that. So that's what I'm moving into now. And for me, that looks like basically sharing more of how I express myself, allowing that for myself and sharing it openly with the world. And each stage is different, but what I would say is I'm getting more comfortable with the stage that I'm at, so that when I emerge and I kind of step into that new level, I'm totally okay with it. It's not like, oh my God, I'm petrified of doing this. I'm actually okay, and there's always a level of fear, of course. But I've already kind of embraced that new level when I go into it. And so it's okay. It's safe.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I teach myself that it's safe, I have a kind of all the bunch of kind of mindset tricks and stuff like that to help me. But that's what I'm moving into now, is being much more publicly and privately happy to share my own expression, and to teach that to others, how that they can step into that and be fearless about it, because it's just you embracing yourself. That's all. And it's quite ridiculous when you think about it, that we're so scared to embrace ourselves, so that's the next stage for me.
And so I could see, I guess one of the things that I've seen you doing recently, which might link into that, is yoga workshops, which include creative expression. So I don't know if I'm right, but I'm guessing the image behind you might be one that was created. So for you can explain in a bit more detail, but what I've seen in some of your images is yoga workshops where you seem to almost be drawing on the surface that you're sitting on. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so this is oh God, it's amazing. It's what I call embodied expression. And for me, this is actually really key to I really think it's like a missing link these days. There's so much about meditation and mindfulness, and yet whilst those are so important, I really feel like that's still keeping people in their heads. Although we talk about breath work and maybe kind of awareness of the body and so on in a lot of mindfulness exercises, I don't think it's quite enough, because we have such a detached and really quite an awful relationship with our bodies, from so much societal conditioning, and obviously kind of the advertising world and so on. We're taught that our bodies are disgusting, and they're they're not good enough, you know, they're too fat, they're too ugly, they're too whatever. They don't work. We're taught that our bodies don't work for us. And so we have all of these disconnects with our bodies that I believe they can only be healed through embodied expression. So that is getting into our bodies, trusting them, and beginning to listen to them compassionately as we begin to open up. You know, we find that space that is not just it's not just a physical space, you know, it's not just, oh, I've got a tight shoulder, so I'll kind of keep working it. It's not just a mental space, although that's very important. It's also emotional. It's finding emotional space around all of the hurt that we have, that we hold in our bodies, you know, all of the stuff that we hate about ourselves, whether that's conscious or unconscious. And an energetic space, just generally finding that and being able to open up into it and actually allow whatever it is inside out, because that's you in the moment. So I've, you know, this is just one of the ones that I did kind of randomly one day, but I do these workshops where people get onto a life-size bit of paper, and so we do like a yoga warm-up first and everything, and kind of get into the mood, as it were. But then we get onto our paper and we feel it out, and we start to really move into moving our bodies around with the pastels. So we use some pastels, and just trusting what comes up. So the intention is not to make art. It's not to make something perfect. It's not even to make something pretty, you know, or pleasing, or any of those things. It's to let go of all of those labels and just to allow what is within to come out onto the paper and trust it.
That sounds amazing. So I know you run these as workshops, and you know where you are, but I guess this is something that if people wanted to try out, they could try out at home, in terms of just letting themselves have that creative expression.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else that you would see as I don't want to say a quick, because I don't mean a quick fix, because nothing is a quick fix, but you know, that's I guess an accessible way of doing something. Is there anything else that you do in your own creative practice, or that you kind of advise clients to do, that people listening could have a go at, just to see what it's like to have that more embodied experience and heal?
I think that it's really important to learn to honor and own your own energies. So we live in a world that is constantly drawing us out of ourselves, our energies, you know, and obviously a lot of that is through kind of apps and screens and social media and pings, you know, notifications. But it's so easy to lose our sense of self through that, and a sense of our own energy. You know, we kind of end up at the end of the day feeling like I've done nothing, and yet I'm exhausted, and why is that, you know? And we really genuinely often can't tell why, and it's because we're not owning our own energies and how they're being absorbed into other people's energies, but also other things, you know, just all the other things that are going on. So once you start to take control and you recognize, you understand where your own energies are, how you can tap into them and grow them for yourself, how you can stop yourself being drawn into other people's energies or other things, and how you can protect yourself from negative sources of energy, so that you're not being zapped in that way. That for me is really key, because if you can't do that, then there's really not much point trying to do all of the kind of more advanced kind of energy stuff, because you've constantly got that drain, that massive drain going on. So really beginning to understand your own energies, that they're not finite, which is so key. We think, oh, that's me, that's me done, that's it. That was one of my biggest lessons personally, was that you don't have finite resources, although it might feel like it at times. There are always ways, and that's why I call myself a life energy alchemist. There are always ways to find more energy for yourself. Mm-hmm. And yes, sometimes that is as simple as taking a nap, but there are lots of ways that you can tap into energy for yourself. So yeah, doing that. And that takes me into what I'm offering, your group, which is the Supercharge Your Energetic Boundaries workshop, which I did. And that takes you through the whole process, basically. It explains, kind of what it is, why you need it, and then it moves you through a really fun hatha yoga session, essentially, but focusing specifically on your energies, on your energetic boundaries, and how to really grow those inner energies, that inner power and light for yourself. So you've not just got boundaries, you've actually grown your own energies as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm really excited that people are going to be able to grab that, and also so support themselves, but also support other people who need donations. So that's really great. And obviously everyone listening, this is a good opportunity for you to dive into some of the stuff that Zoe's been talking about. But as you were saying, so for each person it would be different, right? So one person, it might be, actually, I need to have a nap. Something as simple as, I need to have a nap because it just gets my energy right, which actually is what my husband is like, I've just realized. But for someone else, it might be that their energy drain, for example, is coming, one of the areas is that it's coming from, they're constantly looking at their phone all the time.
Exactly, yeah.
And maybe they need to assess that and understand it. So would what you're offering kind of help them to work through those sorts of things and identify or find the boundaries around some of those things?
It's definitely about starting to bring awareness to it, yes. Great. But the workshop specifically is about really understanding how your energy feels and where it comes from, how it can leach out and be absorbed by other things or people, and how to protect that, and how to grow the energy that you need for yourself at any given time.
That's great, because obviously, as we say, everyone's different. Some people will be energized by some things that other people are drained by. So it's having that awareness to be able to notice, actually, every time I do this thing, my energy drops or it rises or whatever else.
Yeah.
So what do you say to people who either say, as you say, I'm fine, I don't have any problems, I'm all good, or who say, I acknowledge that I get a headache every whatever day, or I feel a bit low, but I don't have time, I don't feel I have the time to deal with this. What's your response to people when they say that kind of thing?
Oh, wow. Well, I think it depends on the person. I gauge for myself whether I feel like somebody is open to, kind of hearing what they might need or want to do, because some people just aren't ready. And you can never, there are some people in my life who desperately need to start to bring that awareness and kind of openness into their lives, but they're not ready, So I never push it with people like that. If I can see like a glimmer, basically I'd say that the key is for somebody who says they want to kind of begin that healing process, but they don't feel like they have the time, the energy, etc. Obviously, the first thing I'd say is, I get that. I really do. You know, I'm human, and I come right back around to that tons of times. You know, like I said, I'm just coming through kind of a growth spurt for myself, and a big part of that was not wanting to move forwards. You know, it's that kind of, well, I'm fine here, I'm happy here, it's, you know, I'm comfortable, everything's kind of working, so, you know, why would I push myself out of that? And of course I know all of the reasons, but it takes time to move through it. So what I'd say to somebody else, maybe who's right at the beginning of all of this, or they feel like they are, but it's too much for them, is, what would it look like on the other side? Because for me, I've come so far. You know, honestly, it makes me so emotional when I think of the person I used to be. Mm-hmm. And I was so stuck. I really felt so stuck in who I was. So I had chronic fatigue, asthma, which was, you know, pretty bad, eczema, which was getting worse and worse and worse, and really starting to impact everything in my life. Headaches, you know, all the time. Allergies that just lasted all year round and would literally floor me. You know, if I got a hay fever, they'd just knock me out. And then pest allergies as well, which got worse and worse and worse. Food intolerances. Oh, gosh, you know, I just think of all of the things that I dealt with for years, for decades actually, and I didn't think there was another way. I thought that was just who I was, and obviously I still struggle with some of those things, and yet it's just a fraction of what it used to be. And along the way, I've healed so much, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And the person I am now compared to then is so, so different. I'm proud to be the person I am now. Obviously, I have my bad days, but I could never have said that. I spent all of my 20s and actually most of my teens but definitely all of my 20s as a manic depressive. And, you know, going into my 30s, well, you know, I had children then to deal with as well. But that was really when I started to kind of really begin to look at my life and think, I've got to do something. And so what are the payoffs? And remember that you don't have to do everything at once. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're going to put out all of this energy and fix everything. Just take it a step at a time. Acknowledge your wins. You know, really, really bring that awareness and that light to your life when you feel like, oh my gosh, that thing I don't have anymore. I don't have to deal with that anymore. It's gone. I've healed that. Isn't that incredible? And that could be a tiny thing, and yet it impacts on your life every single day. So when you heal it, that's a celebration.
Absolutely.
So it is really just, think about how much better your life could be on the other side.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely. That's beautiful. Another thing I heard the other day, I can't remember where it came from, but somebody said to someone else, because they were suffering from chronic illness, and they said, "Oh, I don't have time to deal with it."
Yeah.
And the person's response to them was, "Well, then you better have time to be really, really sick." And they
Yes.
were like, "Oh,
Yeah,
that's a good point." So
exactly.
it's just a reframe.
Yeah, and that for me, it comes back to, what are you focusing on? Are
Mm-hmm.
you focusing on being sick, or are you focusing on feeling great? Because you can feel great even when you're sick.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people don't realize that, but you can.
Mm. So, how does all this holistic approach that you take, this sort of, as you say, energy alchemist approach that you take, how does this work with or complement Western medicine? How do you see the two working together, or not, as the case may be?
Um, so so first of all, I'd say that I grew up, um, yeah, probably from my birth. I don't really know a lot about my kind of really young days, but certainly as far as I remember, I was on medication for my asthma and my eczema and my allergies since I was very, very young. Probably a baby, but at least two, kind of, yeah, very, very young. And so I grew up taking all of those medications and really being dependent on them. And when it came to, oh, I've got a headache, I just take the pills, because not taking them just seems stupid. So I very much came from that point of view of, if you've got a symptom, take something to make it go away. That was how I felt. And yet, now, having gone through what I have gone through, and having done all of the healing that I did without medication, I realize that more often than not, the medications we're taking are not healing anything. They're just masking the symptoms. They're suppressing the symptoms. And when you suppress the symptoms, it creates more problems in your body and in your mind, your spirit, everything, because it's all linked. So with compassion, I'm not saying, oh, stop taking your medications, because that's irresponsible, obviously. But what I think the first step is to say to yourself, well, maybe how might this thing that I'm taking be affecting my holistic well-being? So, for example, it could be that it's, maybe you're taking antidepressants. How is that affecting you in other ways? Is it giving you other side effects, whether physical or mental or emotional, because we are holistic beings, and that's so important to remember. And again, just with that awareness, not having that negative judgment around it, but that spacious, open, honest conversation with yourself. That's so, so fundamental
Mm-hmm.
to your healing, to your ultimate healing. Because when you bring judgment into it, and when you say, well, that's bad, then it's not helping you. So first of all, yeah, having that open, honest conversation with what you're taking, and then obviously exploring all of the alternatives, all of the other options, perhaps alongside your medication at first. So if you're, for me, I came off everything at once, because I didn't really see the point otherwise. And yet, having said that, so I stopped taking my my asthma and my eczema medication because they both contain steroids, and I knew that steroids were perpetuating and worsening my condition, so it was the only option for me. However, because of the healing crisis that I went through, I ended up having to take at certain times a lot more anti-allergy, what are they called?
Antihistamine.
Hay fever.
Yeah, the antihistamine stuff.
Antihistamines, that's it. Yeah. So I was taking a lot of antihistamines for a while, until I realized that same connection, that the more I took, the worse I felt, actually. They were making me more and more kind of itchy and frantic. So, but until that point, I kind of depended on them. It wasn't like, well, I'm not going to take that because, I don't believe in medications at all. I think that you can use something until you don't need it anymore. But if you're taking something forever, then there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same. I went through, I had horrendous insomnia, and so literally had no other option than to go to the doctor and say, please give me something, because I'm not sleeping, and I'm having to, basically, I'm having these kind of narcoleptic dropouts, and I've got small children that I'm looking after, and it was just horrendous. And yet again, even the doctor said, you can't take this for more than a few weeks. And I was like, that's fine, I just need something now to get me through it. And I remember at the time kind of having to wean myself off it, thinking, well, what do I do now? But at the same time knowing it couldn't last forever. So it really is, with Western medicine, it's not a solution. It's a, what's the word? It's an aid, but it's going to be a temporary aid whilst you kind of figure out what else you can do, who else you can see, what else you can express, what you can unearth to help your own healing. Because medicine isn't healing you, it's just covering stuff up. It's just kind of a band-aid, literally.
Yeah. So it's bringing that awareness in to sort of say, okay, well, I may need this right now because it helps me do X, Y, Z, but I need to look at this from a bigger picture and actually not just ignore all the things that I'm not healing and take pills and cover them up.
Yeah, and whilst I say that, I absolutely want to acknowledge how hard it is for people. I'm not, again, there's no judgment if you're on medications, and most of us are. There's no judgment in that. I totally understand, because I've been there. And it's but at the same time, I really want to encourage you to not think, well, this is it, I'm on this for the rest of my life because the doctor said so. I don't believe that. I really don't believe that. And I think that's one of the biggest lies that we've been told, that we are powerless, that, in terms of our own healing. I think as soon as you start to take control of your own health and well-being, your holistic well-being, then you start to heal. That's just the way it is. When you feel powerless and you give it over to somebody, to a pill, to a doctor, and say, you need to heal me, then you're never going to heal.
Absolutely. And I think, that makes a lot of sense. It's not a discredit to Western medicine. It's saying that actually we have more resource and reserve inside ourselves than we're aware of. And if we don't tap into that through lots of different mechanisms, then of course we're going to choose other ways of doing it that feel quicker. But sometimes actually it's a case of having that awareness and connection and balance of energy that can bring you back into a more stable long-term way of dealing with it, rather than having necessarily always having to rely on external inputs for it. I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's again, we're brought up in this kind of society where and I think it is changing, though. Having said that, yeah, this society where, oh, you've got this problem, therefore, you just take a pill and you fix it. Like when I was growing up, and kind of, starting my kind of professional career, people would say, oh, you've got flu, well, just take some tablets and, get yourself to work. And it's like, that's the best solution for everybody, is it? So we've very much grown up, I think, our generation certainly, with that mindset of you just got to get over it. Yeah. And you've just got to take the pill and get on with life. And that is so, so detrimental to your health, to your well-being, and to everybody around you as well.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. I want to be respectful of your time, so I've got 2 more questions. The first one was, based on everything that we've talked about and what you focus on, what do you think, what topic or area do you think we're kind of missing a trick with at a young age in schooling, that would help with some of this stuff? What do you think should be maybe mandatory or encouraged that we are just not learning when we're kids at school, that would almost help us be more equipped for dealing with life in this way?
I think so. It comes back to, for me, the idea of mindfulness and meditation, but with that embodied awareness. So, I don't think that having PE, or gym, or whatever you call it, is enough. Moving our bodies obviously is essential, but it's not just about that. It's about really learning to tap into and trust our own bodies. And the intuition that goes with that. So, understanding when something really feels right, even if it's scary, it really feels right, or something really doesn't feel good, and why that might be, and really trusting it, because I think we don't have that when we don't nourish that power that we have within ourselves. And we think we go through our kind of cognitive processes instead, and we put our brain on a pedestal, if you like. And I really think mindfulness is so important. Mindfulness with embodied awareness. If we could teach that to everybody from a very young age, then we would be super beings.
We would be all that we can be. Have you thought about taking some of your beautiful expression workshops into schools?
I'm going to be really totally honest. I don't have a lot of patience with kids.
So we'll leave that to someone else.
So, yeah, I mean, even like, trying to kind of teach my own kids a bit of yoga and stuff, it's like, oh God, it's so hard. It's so hard. It's a whole other ball game teaching kids. It really is. I'm very much on an adult level, I think. So yeah,
maybe even young adults or teenagers, helping them to reconnect. That could be maybe an area that you'd have a bit more. Yeah. At least they might sit still for 2 minutes.
Exactly. I've tried like doing yoga with both my kids, and like one of them is like my daughter. She's pretty good actually. She usually kind of follows along, but she's rubbish at sitting still and doing anything like meditation. She just can't. I can't, mummy, I can't. Tell her to take a deep breath, and she's like, I can't.
Love it.
Whereas my son, he just kind of throws himself around and flops on the floor and like, yeah, just no. It's a whole other ball game.
Well, it's good for them to have the exposure on some level anyway. It's going in somehow.
Exactly. They
Which is
see me
good.
doing stuff, and yeah, I think that's important because yeah, it's teaching their subconscious. So yeah.
Lovely. Great. And obviously you've already shared with us what our listeners and our viewers can kind of grab as this fantastic offering. So thank you so much for that. And those that are listening or watching, you'll be able to get that from GIFTEDgiving.club /self-expression. But the other last question I wanted to ask you, Zoe, is if people were hearing about what you're saying and thinking, oh, that sounds really interesting, I've been there or I am there, and are not saying I don't have time, they're saying I'm ready to do something, how can they find you? How can they connect with you to work with you, other than obviously grabbing this lovely thing that you're
Yeah,
offering?
sure. So I'm at my website is at lifeenergyalchemy.com. And there's I have some free resources on there as well, and you can read a little bit more about my story and my blog and everything. And on social media, I love Instagram and Facebook most of all. But you can find me on pretty much all of the normal platforms at Zoe KM Foster. So that's ZOE KM Foster.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really enlightening, and I've loved hearing about everything you're doing and actually speaking to you and seeing you for the first time. So it's been great, and I'm really looking forward to sharing what you do and hopefully encouraging people to grab what you're offering so that we can raise money together as well.
Oh, it's been fantastic talking to you, Raika. Absolutely lovely and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.